Welcome back to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. Let me ask you something. Are you ready to explore life beyond academia? In this episode, I talk with Leslie Castro Woodhouse, PhD, founder of Origami Editorial and co-editor of the fabulous book, The Art of Academic Editing. Leslie explains how she transitioned from academic life to building a successful freelance editing and book coaching business. With a PhD in history from UC Berkeley and professional experience spanning corporate marketing, graphic design, and coaching student writers, Leslie brings years of knowledge and expertise to help academics refine their ideas. She shares her candid story, including the challenges of leaving academia, learning the ins and outs of editing, and finding her niche as a book coach. She also offers practical advice for anyone considering freelancing, from starting small while you're still in academia to gaining the confidence to build a sustainable business. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Leslie, and if you're curious about becoming an academic editor or coach, go to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Now, here's this week's episode. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. Hi, Leslie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, nice to meet you, Paulina. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to meet you finally. So we were just talking a minute ago how we are both former academics, PhDs, and we got into academic editing. So why don't you start off and share with us a little bit about your journey into and through academia?
Sure. Well, it's going to sound somewhat familiar and somewhat not. Because actually, academia was like my second career. I had actually been working in the corporate world for several years, a number of years before I decided to go back to graduate school and get a PhD, and I really wanted to be a professor. My degrees are, I have a master's and a PhD from UC Berkeley, the master's in Asian studies, the PhD in history with a focus on Asia, Southeast Asia in particular. And I finished in 2009, which was kind of exactly the wrong moment. A number of my cohort, like either, deferred their graduations a couple of years or did other things. But no, I had to graduate in '09 when there were just like no jobs and the economy was terrible. And it took me some time to kind of hit my, find a new pathway and hit my stride. And I don't know if this is like the next question. I don't want to anticipate you too much, but it was sort of like I wanted to get into academia, but I just, as much as I banged on the door, it just wasn't going to open for me. Like I adjuncted for several years from, between '09 and really 2015, when I finally found a part-time editing position at a small humanities journal at a university nearby where I lived in San Francisco. And that was where I started getting my actual real editorial experience. And that was 2015. I was there for 3 years before I transitioned into, like as a freelancer. I started freelancing in 2015 when I left, 2018. And then a few years later, in the middle of the pandemic, I decided to actually go for it and just create a business. Like no more fooling around, no more, this is a part-time thing until I find something else or something better. But let's lean into this and make it real. And that was 2021, and things have gone pretty well. Here between here and there, but it's been a really interesting journey along the way.
Yeah,
So
it
I guess
is.
I'll
It's
start
interesting
there.
how things shift with the market, with scholars' needs. During the last few years, we've seen AI coming about. So
Mhm.
yeah, it definitely keeps you on your toes. When you
Yeah.
started at the Journal in 2015, was that as a freelance copy editor, or you were considered like in-house, you were managing editor? What were you doing there?
Actually, I was managing editor. It was nice because I got to experience all the different phases and the tasks that are involved in producing an academic journal. And it was very small. It was like me and the head of a department who was kind of like the main editor. And so I was the person who researched who was going to be a peer reviewer and, maintained the schedules and kept things going out for review and coming back. I did the copy editing, but I also did like the InDesign layout of the thing and producing a downloadable PDF of the journal itself, which was twice a year. And so I was actually a part-time employee at the university, and at times I supplemented that, like I was also an adjunct professor, so I was just like on campus a lot doing both things. But it was an in-person position on that campus, like way back before, in the before times,
Yeah. And
right?
so
Like
it's
long before pandemics.
Yeah, it sounds like so you were essentially self-taught, right? I mean, aside from like all the skills you learned in your PhD about research and publishing and all of that, you basically had to learn the copy editing details, the InDesign,
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah. Well, I had done some graphic design in my previous life as a corporate marketing person, and a graphic designer. I brought some of that experience. But the copy editing and really learning, like, what does it mean to have a dangler or, something that's not working, how to identify those problems and name them and then fix them. That was all stuff I learned on the job and in some training courses as I went along. But it really wasn't until I left that position and went freelance, actually like closer to starting my business, that I really did a certificate. I did the ACES pointer copy editing certificate to try and really learn the rules before I just hung out my shingle, right? And became a full-on professional doing this. And that was really helpful. But even so, all along the way, I've learned something new. Every year I've done this, and it's been really a really interesting progression. But I have to say, writing was always my strength as a grad student and as a scholar. Um, I wouldn't say I didn't like teaching, but I didn't love teaching. There's some people who are just like they're born teachers, and I never felt like I had the opportunity to really get that comfortable in the classroom. Um, and research was also really like, well, I did a lot of research overseas, and it was lonely and difficult to be away from my family. So when I struck upon editing, it was lovely that because I could apply a lot of my favorite parts of graduate school, which is like reading a lot, taking in the ideas, and then talking about them with other scholars. And that was the part I discovered I really loved when I was actually part time at the university, because in conjunction with the journal, they also would host a small conference, research oriented conference each semester. And we would take the papers from that and develop a journal issue out of it. But as part of the conference, I got to hang out with scholars and talk to them about their work. Um, I realized I really love just talking to people about their stuff. And it turns out other scholars love it when people ask them about their work, because outside of academia, not a whole lot of people necessarily get what we do. And so it's really so nice, and people really appreciate it when, you could ask them questions about their research, informed questions, and be truly curious about what they were working on. So that was a big piece of what finally like drove me to the pathway that I'm on now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the failings of graduate programs, I think, is that they don't Among other things that they don't prepare us for, they don't prepare us for how much an academic career can affect our family life, right? It seems like somebody
Yeah,
should really sit you down and say, listen, if you want to get married, have a partner, have children, if you have older family members that you need to care for and be there for, this might not be a
yeah,
great arrangement.
yeah,
You don't get to choose where you're going to live. You have to go where the jobs are, and that's just sort of the way it is. Or having field
yeah.
research travel for that. So yeah, I agree. I mean, that was a huge reason why I left too, was because my mother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer. We wanted, like you have a limited amount of time left with this person and,
Yeah,
any family members really. You want to be there for them. And
yeah.
I think that for me, it clarified that family is more important than a career. I can get another career. But yeah, the other thing you were talking about was teaching, and I agree with
Mm,
that. I enjoyed teaching, but I found it really emotionally draining. Your students
yeah,
come
yeah.
in, and especially people who are 18, 19, 20 years old, they're going through this very tumultuous time in their lives, and they need help and they need guidance. And I think especially women faculty, they rely a lot on
Mm,
us because we're like mom, or we're like this
yeah.
mother or aunt like figure to them that they can go and get advice from. And so, yeah, I think editing lets us engage in that kind of instructional type role, but without all the extra emotional needs. So you left the journal in 2018 and you went into freelancing. How did you go about that?
Well, sort of by accident. But I also just kind of sent out an email and just told everybody I knew, like everybody in my network, which is to say, like former academic colleagues, present academic colleagues, just everybody I knew in academia, outside of academia. At that point, I didn't really know where I was going to focus. And I wasn't sure there was going to be enough work in academic editing to actually go in that direction full time. And so at the beginning, I was just kind of really broad and a little scattershot, to be honest. I even contacted like local businesses to see about like doing editing work for them. But ultimately, it was my network, my scholarly network, that was the most fertile field for building a clientele because to them, they're like, oh, wait, you're somebody who's trained like me and you know how to speak my language. You know what I'm talking about. I don't have to explain like who is Foucault to you, right? Or what is Marxist critique of a particular topic. And granted, I'm in the humanities, right? So if you're like a math or science editor, that's a whole other specialty, and it exists. So that's great. It's another possible pathway. But it took me a little time to figure out like, oh wait, this is marketable. This is kind of the direction I can go and this is how I can start building a real business. But it took me 3 years, like really between 2018 and 2021, I was kind of rattling around like, well, surely there are other full-time positions I can get or do that I want a full-time paycheck, I want health insurance, I want benefits. And I was going after those positions and they weren't happening for me. And finally, when the pandemic hit, I've been feeling like such a loser, to be honest with you, because I was just like, oh, I can't. I'm like the most overeducated person in the world here, and I can't get a job. What's wrong with me? And the pandemic sort of provided a nice sort of hard reset, if you will, because I realized, hey, a whole lot of people are jobless now, right? A whole lot of people just got laid off. Like, wow, okay, we're all in the same boat, and there's no shame. There's no shame. And I stopped feeling terrible about myself and started getting myself together in terms of like, okay, how could I apply these skills and what would I most like to do? And I realized how much I really enjoyed the editing work that I had done as a freelancer and decided, okay, I'm just going to lean into it. I'm just going to do it. I've been worried about taking this risk and really committing myself to this path. And until the pandemic sort of just wiped everybody's slate clean, so to speak. And that was the catalyst for me, was late in 2020. Well, there wasn't much else to do. but figure out what I was going to do next. And so that kind of provided me with the springboard that I needed. And in January 1st, 2021, I had my website up. I was like, okay, let's go. Let's do this thing. And I was ready to roll and started getting my first academic clients not long after that.
That's so great. I think, maybe it's human nature, maybe it's like the scars that academia has left on us. But I remember when I started out, I had quit my academic job. We moved across the
Mhm.
country, and it's like, okay, you got to pay the bills, and I applied to all these
Right,
non-academic jobs, and like you kept getting told I was overqualified, and it does, like, okay, yes, I'm overqualified, but yeah, you still feel like a loser, right? Like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I want this job? Why don't you want me to
right,
have this job, And I figured
yeah,
I'd just try copy editing because I had just published a book and worked with a copy editor. And yeah, so I sort of fell into it. And it took me a few years too to get into more of like working with private clients because there's that little voice in your head that says, like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to run a
right,
business. Like, this
right.
isn't
So
gonna work for
what do I
me.
know? Why is anybody going
Yeah.
to think I know anything?
Yeah, and I remember being on the editor Facebook groups and seeing other people talking about how they had private clients and they charged, X amount per word. And I was like, what? Like surely I could never do that. Um, and then, yeah, I think for me, I think I watched, it was Katie Ferris's, she's a works specifically with business faculty, and she has a little mini course. I don't remember the name of it, but I can post it in the notes. It's a little like 90-minute workshop that she did where she talks about basically how you can make more money and raise your rates and how to get clients and all
Mhm.
that. And that's something with that course, and I will be grateful to her forever for making it. It flipped a switch in my head and was like, you know what, maybe I can do this. And so that,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we just like, it's like we have to get over our own questions and doubts. And then finally it's really not that hard. Once you could do that, you go out and you find clients and you get business and you do a good job and you get referrals and it's not that bad. But yeah, so
Right.
you were a freelancer. You mentioned in our talk before, you mentioned being a freelancer with Kara Jordan. I do want to mention anyone who is listening, watching. Leslie has co-edited this fantastic volume with Kara Jordan called The Art of Academic Editing. I've been reading this, and each chapter is sort of an introduction or a summary of the different types of editing, book coaching, developmental editing, copy editing, all of that, written by different fantastic academic editors. And I think anybody out there who is thinking about going into editing or who is new to academic editing, even me, having done this for 5 years, I've found it really interesting and helpful. So I definitely want to recommend that. Talk to us about your work with Kara and how that was, or maybe you were also freelancing for other companies too. I'm not sure. How is that different now from running your own business?
Well, it has its upsides and its downsides. I mean, as I spun up my business, I decided I was going to try and sort of like subcontract, kind of have a number of different income streams, right? Rather than rely entirely on any one thing to support me altogether. And so I went looking for companies like Cambridge Editors, Flatpage, which is Kara's company. I looked at Cactus, although I never did any work for them. But there's a number of different companies out there that employ academic editors in various capacities. And so I got on board with a couple of them. And I also found work an editor in an editing pool connected to a university department, which continues to send me work, which I really love. And that kind of helped. It really helped me kind of establish a base. It also helped me get a taste of different types of editing that I could do, whether it was like copy editing or developmental editing, and even book coaching came into the mix while I was doing this sampling and doing this subcontracting. And what's nice about subcontracting is somebody else finds the work and somebody else contracts with the client, handles all of that paperwork and the details, and does the client management to a great extent, and handles that for you. Whereas when you have your own business, that process is on you. Like you got to figure that out. And it's not that it's rocket science, but it does require some thinking, right? And some detail orientation, as you're figuring stuff out, like how to write a contract and how to establish like an onboarding process with a client and things like that. Um, but it was nice as an early career, an editor who's starting out to get a taste and see how other people were running their businesses and how their processes worked so that I could figure out how I wanted to run my own. And after about a year and a half, 2 years or so, I mean, this year I'm fully on my own. Like I don't subcontract with Care anymore. We parted on very good terms. But I was like, you know what? I've got so much of my own work. I really don't think I can, take on work from these other streams anymore. So that work doing the subcontracting actually helped get me to the place, help give me the time to build and explore the direction I really wanted to go with my business and help get me to where I am now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's what the faculty or former faculty who enroll in my community of becoming an academic editor, that's what I've shared with them is that working for these editing companies or editing agencies is not ideal because they don't pay you a lot, but you get to
Yeah,
perfect your skills and learn the ropes as an editor, sort of like on the job training without having to worry about chasing clients and invoicing and contracts and all that. Because it does,
yeah,
like you said,
yeah.
it's not hard, but it is new and there's a learning curve. And when you feel really comfortable and strong as an editor, then that's sort of like in the back of your mind, and you can start to address, or answer these other questions of how do I actually run the business part.
Yeah.
And like you said, also, you can, while you're working for the editing agencies, you can also start working on your website and blogging and connecting with
Hmm.
other potential clients and those sorts of things. So yeah, I had much the same transition and finally reached the point where I had enough private clients that I could quit the other contracting jobs and go out on my own. So tell us about your business today. You are an editor and a book coach. And so what is it like 50-50 on that work, or how does that break down for you?
Gosh, I haven't really sat down to parse like the percentages, but it probably is about 50-50 actually. Um, and most of the copy editing that I do copy editing has moved from like the center core business to like a side, and I wouldn't say peripheral, but it's more a chunk of the business. And I'm doing it mainly for people who I work with as coaching clients. So that, as we work together in developmental phases and we get their manuscript drafted, they don't have to send it off to another person to copy edit. I don't want to make them do that. And I can copy it. I enjoy copy editing. I do. So I keep that as part of the mix, but it's not my exclusive focus. My goal was really to develop about smallish pool of ongoing coaching clients, like scholars who I work with month to month over the longer term on bigger projects, like turning their dissertation into a book, writing their second book, tuning up chapters to become journal articles, and vice versa, helping them develop book proposals as well. So I've tried to lean more into the developmental end, which in turn ended up becoming like book coaching, which I didn't even know existed. But then I didn't even know developmental editing was a thing until after I had started my business. I know how sad is that, but it wasn't until I stumbled across Laura Portwood Stacer and her course, her little intro course that I think is still at the EFA's website, if you want to go look for this, on academic developmental editing. I was like, oh my God, it's a thing. It's really a thing. And I went, wow, okay, that is so my thing. That is so where I want to go. Because for me, even though I enjoy working with the language and shaping, making a sentence read better and flow better, um, more before that, prior to that, is really like the ideas and making the ideas flow better, making sure that the ideas are more clearly expressed. And that's the part where my first love, is like yakking with other scholars about what they do. Like I get to, that flies into action. Like I just want to talk to people about, so how are you feeling about this thesis? Or is there a thesis here? I'm not getting a thesis. Let's talk about though, what do you want this book to put out there in the world, and what do you want a reader to take away from it? And some of this is very consistent with how people work with fiction writers and people who are completely outside academia. But I find it really enjoyable to just have the opportunity to talk with scholars in an open and honest way about how their work is going, especially since, in our role, because we're outside of academia, but we've been inside it and we know how it is and how political it can be. We can also create a safe space for our clients where we can talk about, okay, I hate writing. If you hate writing, okay, let's start there. Or I would like to write, but I don't have a really good handle on, setting up a regular writing schedule or a process, or how do I go about that? How do I build that? Because so few of us, I don't want to say any, but so few of us get any kind of training around writing and scholarly writing in particular. And any writing is hard. Writing is hard. And then academic writing, scholarly writing is like exponentially harder because it's writing is like juggling balls. And academic writing is like riding a bike while juggling plates and balancing something on a teddy bear on your head. I mean,
That's
it's like
on
you have to do a
fire.
whole lot of
Something
things.
has to be on fire in this.
Something has to be on fire. I think it would be the teddy bear. The teddy bear would definitely be on fire. And you don't want to drop anything, right? It's like something's on fire, the dishes are breakable, you're in motion, right? There's so much that has to happen all at the same time in scholarly writing. And it's hard. It's hard to learn how to do it. And even people who've finished the dissertation, right? That you're still a pretty early career scholarly writer, even with a dissertation under your belt. It's like from there, moving from there to the book is a big process. And it's nice to be able, I didn't know how satisfying it was going to feel to actually help people through that process and help them feel more confident in their abilities and their skills and their knowledge and their voice and find their voice. Because damn it, there are some smart people, okay? And the world needs to know what smart people know. And I'm very, very devoted to that philosophy that what I'm really trying to do, I think of myself as like book doula. I'm trying to help people bring this project to fruition in the world, like give birth to their ideas in the world in a way that's going to make them the most easily understood and accepted and easily disseminated in the world so that that book gets bought. It doesn't just sit on the bookshelf or in the warehouse, but rather that actual people read our scholarship because the world needs our ideas out there more now than ever. So, and I feel good helping people do that, helping people get their ideas out into the world. It's
Yeah, I
important.
love that. Academia graduate programs, it's like you get all this instruction in the literature and what does the research say about these ideas, but everything that you're doing in your day-to-day life, from teaching to making a syllabus to serving on committees to writing, right? Even writing a journal article. I remember, well, it's all you're expected to just learn by doing or learn by watching other people. No one actually
Yeah.
teaches you how to do all these things. I remember giving my first conference presentation. I've done the PowerPoint, I've submitted the paper, right? And I'm standing up there and I have this moment of panic where I think, is a PowerPoint at a conference the same as a PowerPoint that I do for class? because nobody had told me like what is my conference presentation supposed to look like. And thankfully it worked out and
Yeah.
I had done what I was supposed to do. But I just had this moment where it's like no one's ever actually told me how to do these things. No one's taught me how to teach.
Yeah.
I remember asking my mentors, they're all like, hey, your dissertation's great. You need to turn it into a book. And it's like, okay, how do I do that? And they
So,
go, you just do it. I'm pretty sure
do.
that's
Yeah.
exactly what they told me. You just do it. And it's like, that's
Yeah.
not helpful.
You
Like
just
you're not
revise it
helping
and
me.
send it to a press. And then they
Yeah.
go, what the hell is this? And they send it back to you.
Yeah. And
Oh my
yeah,
God.
so I think that having the fact that you have that scholarly background and you've been there, yeah, it gives you so much more empathy for what people are going through. And you're not going to judge them or think that they're dumb or, whatever, like as if they were to go to their department chair and ask these questions or something. They're worried that they're going to get judged or it's going to hurt their
Yeah.
their professional reputation or something. And so, yeah, it's so great that people have a book coach or editor or whatever to go to and to get that advice and to just kind of be able to take a deep breath and go, all right, this person's actually going to help me. So that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. And not judge me or find me wanting in some way, because that's another element of academia that we kind of have to get over or get through if whether people want to stay in academia or not, but particularly people writing and trying to get their scholarship out there, it's so challenging. And I don't think I've maybe had one or two book coaching clients who did not suffer from massive imposter syndrome. It's really rampant in academia. And I think it's part of the culture that, we're in the room with really smart people on a regular basis. It's true. But that doesn't make us outsiders. Really, we are all inside the room. But it's so easy for others in academia to kind of exercise their personal politics to make others feel less than and small and like their voice doesn't matter. And it's very easy for us to internalize that stuff. I mean, we're scholars. We're usually a little bit on the introvert side of the spectrum, and we tend to be very thoughtful, and we tend to analyze our voice and our actions maybe inordinately, maybe too much at times. But this is part of where I think a coach can offer a safe place where, I work with scholars and we can talk about whatever insecurities they're having, about gaps in the argument. And because it's all about being the ally of the scholar and helping them get to where they really feel confident in what they have to say and they can express it in the most confident and convincing way possible in their writing.
Yeah, that's something that surprised me as I mean, you would expect that junior faculty who've never written a book before would come to you with questions and doubts and all that. But yeah, I've had senior scholars, tenured faculty, endowed chairs who are writing their third or fourth or fifth book come to me as for editing, and you hear
Mm-hmm.
the self-doubt in their voice or read it in their emails. Is this good? Do you
Right?
think this is strong enough? Have I chosen the right publisher? All these questions and doubts. And I sort of think to myself, like, you're a rock star. Like, why?
I
Yes,
know
this
you're
is
asking
great. I
me,
love
like,
this.
yeah,
And it's just it's heartbreaking to see what people go through that they get to that point where they just feel so much doubt about themselves. And I've noticed that in the students or in the people in my community that I coach, where they're making that jump from academia to business. Uh, and they're so afraid to charge decent rates, or
yeah,
um, I was talking to a community member who's starting out with coaching, and she was talking about charging like $30 an hour to grad students or faculty for coaching, and I'm going, no, you have to charge at least $100 an hour. And there's an
yeah,
ethical reason when you're working with graduate students, obviously, to charge a little bit less, but your time, even if it's a grad student, your time is worth more than $30 an hour. So,
Oh my God,
um,
yes. Yes, absolutely.
yes. So, yeah, I think that it takes some time to build up that confidence. And speaking
Yeah.
of that, what if you were talking to somebody who was thinking about becoming an editor, an academic editor? Maybe they're still in academia and they're just terrified to leave their job, even though they're miserable. Maybe they've already left and they're looking at going into editing. What pieces of advice would you have for them to get started and to get to the point where you are, where you've got private clients coming in and you're happy and life is good?
I would say it's okay to start wherever you are comfortable. Okay. And that's going to be a different place for everybody. Okay. Because you can start out freelancing without a website, without, you don't have to go all over social media and announce things to the world. You know, you don't have to become super visible, such that you could start taking on editing projects as a side gig while you are still in academia, like in your full-time job, right? And take on a project here and there until as you build your skills and you get more familiar with like what is it I really want to do for people. Do I want to work on developmental editing? Do I want to do more copy editing? Do I want to actually work as a coach and help people through this process? And so, but I think that there's a fear of I'm going to step out in this big way and make a big commitment in front of people and maybe fail at it, right? Or not succeed quickly enough to make it look like, oh, this was worth leaving my full-time academic job for, right? And you don't have to do that. You don't have to leave entirely. You can start small where you are and grow it in stages, grow it in phases, and until you get to a place where it's big enough and there's enough work that and enough clients already established that you're able to get more referrals. And then perhaps you can look at, okay, I'm going to plot my path. How much income do I need to make in order to feel comfortable like leaving my full-time role and leaning into this full-time? If it indeed becomes a place you want to go full-time. So I think it's also possible to, some people are in an adjunct career where they've got like maybe a couple of roles, adjunct roles, where editing could make a good, really good supplement to that and give you the equivalent of a full-time salary, essentially. But I think the most important part is not to have put a lot of expectations on like how it has to look for you to start a business because it's not going to be the same for everybody. And for me, I mean, I freelanced for 3 years between 2018 and 2021. I didn't have an editing website. I was doing work on an ongoing basis for a particular journal where I was copy editing on a quarterly basis and taking in other small jobs. And it wasn't until I established the website that I was able to really kind of go bigger. And that was part of that process. But by that time, I felt a lot more comfortable and a lot more confident that I had a good sense of what I was doing and what I wanted to offer clients. And even so, it's okay for that to change over time. And it has for me, I think it has for you. Um, just because you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do now, doesn't mean that's what you have to do forever. So it's really okay. I found that I had set up so many hurdles for myself to clear that I think it was the pandemic intervention kind of just like wiping everything away. Like, no, you don't have to do that. Guess what? You're home. You have an internet connection. You have Zoom. You have a laptop. You have these skills. Guess what? You too can start an editing business. And it worked. It really did. So don't be afraid of starting small and working your way, kind of feeling your way. Truly, I think that's probably the best route for a lot of people to take because that way you get to figure out the things that you like to do the best and the people you want to do it for.
Yeah, I think that's the most amazing thing about freelancing or being a business owner is that you have that total flexibility, not only when you work or where you work, but the work that you're doing. I think people I've heard from a lot of academics that they're scared to leave academia because they don't want to work 9 to 5. And I just have to laugh at that every time because to me, academia wasn't flexible. I was working 7 days a
Mm,
week after I had my son. And it was
right.
long hours, constantly stressed, constantly anxious about everything. And here I am, I work
Hmm.
maybe 30 hours a week because I still have two little kids. And if I need to take Tuesday off because my kid is sick, I do it. Or if
Hmm.
it's a Friday and I don't feel like working, as long as I don't have any deadlines to meet, I go take the day off. Or
Yeah.
I pivoted from copy editing into teaching this course. And the options for coaching, I think, are just endless. Whatever it is that you're passionate about. One of my students had executive function coaching training, so she works with
Mm.
graduate students who have ADHD. I have another one who
Wow.
is interested in working with high school students to train them in writing and stuff. And these are just ideas
Oh,
they
that's
came up
great.
with over the course of our coaching program. And so, yeah, it's just anything that you want to do, I think you can make it happen. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining me on this call.
Oh,
It's
you're
been
welcome.
really fun to talk to you and hear about your journey. If anybody would like to work with you, how should they get in touch?
Well, you can find me via my website, which is, and my business name is Origami Editorial, and it's www.origamieditorial.com. Really, really crazy complicated there. And you can also email me either at my personal email address, which is leslie.woodhouse@gmail.com. And it's Leslie Woodhouse, just like it sounds, at Gmail. Or at editor@origamieditorial.com. But I'm also on LinkedIn. Origami has a page on Facebook. So you can also find me there. I don't do a whole lot of posting, a whole lot of social media, but I am there. So you can find me. So you know I'm real.
That's great. I will share all of those links and the email addresses in the show notes so people can find you. And thanks again
Oh,
for
excellent.
joining me.
Oh, you're welcome, Pauline. It's my pleasure.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.